All right. Hey, everybody. Looks like we got a few people. Please let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay. All right, so it looks like we got just a few more minutes before we're scheduled to get started. So I see a few people kind of trickling in. Welcome. All right, thank you, Justin. It's good to know. I never know if people can actually hear me. I assume they can, but it's always good for that reassurance before we get too deep into things. Awesome. So let me know. I'll ask a few different times during the session today for like questions, but if you have any questions about anything AP Lang related or anything related to any of like the essays or multiple choice or anything like that, please let me know because I wanted this particular session to be a little bit more open-ended. Last time we talked about a few different kind of like planning and syllabus and just like back to school topics, but I know for some of us, back to school is like really close. For me, it's a couple weeks away. So I figured instead of me planning like a ton of content to talk everyone through, I figured it would be better if I just kind of asked what people needed and we kind of work from there. So feel free to, you can either put it in the chat if you want to, or there is a Q&A tab. I think it shows up on everybody else's screen, not just mine, but I'm happy to answer questions either way. So if there is something that you want to talk about tonight, feel free to let me know because I want to make sure that if you're giving up your Sunday evening or at least an hour of it, that it's valuable to you as well. All right, so while people are hopefully typing some questions, I'm going to prepare to share my screen just to kind of show a couple of slides. All right, so hopefully I can make this a little bit bigger. All right, so while people are typing in the chat, I'm just gonna share just a little quick slideshow. Like I said, I wanted today to be more like open-ended and just kind of us being able to chat, but this is the unofficial AP Lang teacher chat. So if you haven't joined us in the past, I have been hosting these since I think like last December. So just since like 2021. And these are not affiliated with the College Board in any way, but I wanted an opportunity to connect with other AP Lang teachers. In my district, I'm the only AP Lang teacher. I have a somewhat small district compared to others, but it's kind of big for my state. We're a decent sized school for the state of Arkansas. And so I love the opportunity to be able to connect with others because I don't really have anyone to plan with. And I love kind of knowing what other people are doing and how I could help. So that's why I started doing these unofficial teacher chats. Now, starting next month, so it's always going to be the last Sunday of the month, but starting in August, tentatively, Tim Pretest from the Garden of English is going to be joining me on these, at least for the next few of them. I think he and I have officially like solidified that we're going to collaborate and team up and stuff. He is super busy, so we definitely are going to be doing something in August, but I think he'll be popping into the teacher chat, or at least I hope so. We had kind of talked about that previously, that he would kind of join in on some of these and give some advice as well. So if you haven't heard of him, Tim is from the Garden of English. He has great content as well. And he and I sometimes team up to do different videos and a lot of stuff before the exam. So I was excited that he was interested in hopefully doing something with me just to like really focus on teachers. So if we haven't met yet, my name is Beth Hall. I'm an AP Lang teacher from Arkansas, and I go by Coach Hall Writes on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. So if you are not following on any of those platforms and you use them regularly, I would love it if you would follow, especially on YouTube, because that's where I put the most of my content. So I do some teacher videos and also a lot of videos for students as well. Usually the teacher ones say teacher in the title somewhere, just so that it's hopefully a little bit more clear. And I've been doing this since February of 2019. So I have a lot of old videos, some of which I'm going to be updating, and I'm also going to be creating new content throughout the fall. So if you ever have ideas of something you want me to either revisit or to talk about, feel free to reach out via email or Facebook, Instagram, whatever, because I want to make sure that my videos are helpful. And also, I don't know if any of you are on TikTok, but if you have students on TikTok, feel free to let them know that I'm on TikTok as well. I haven't posted anything super recently, kind of taking a break from TikTok, at least the content side of it. But I noticed that a lot of students are on that platform. And so I try to create like shorter tip videos for students as well. Although usually I get a lot of comments on like, oh, AP Lang, why is this coming up on my For You page? But usually the kids are very polite and gracious. It's just always funny when you can tell that somehow somebody stumbled across it and they were like, oh, I don't want to think about school right now. So anyway, feel free to connect on those platforms. All right, so today we're going to be talking about kind of planning and brainstorming for the upcoming year, because I'm sure there is maybe a little bit of excitement, maybe a little bit of nerves. So if you're a brand new AP Lang teacher, welcome. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have, because I know in the beginning, it can be super nerve-wracking, especially if you maybe have only had a little bit of training or no training. Feel free to ask any questions that you have, because we've all been there. And honestly, veteran teachers sometimes have questions too. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. But welcome to everybody. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A tab. And also, sometimes during these chats, like we might share resources as well. So if you have a resource that you're willing to share with others, feel free to add it to the chat at any time. I know last time we had people recommending the donut for current events resources. We had a couple people share resources in the chat, which was super helpful. So if there's something that you have that you want to share in the chat, please do so. And then I can't see the chat right now, so there might already be some questions in there, but I am curious, how are you feeling about the upcoming school year, and what questions do you have? Because I know I'm starting in 2 weeks. So we start August 15th. Most of the state of Arkansas goes back a week later. We're just special. And I'm still kind of in this like state of disbelief where I know I have stuff to do. Earlier today, I was trying to like update my Google Classroom, but I'm also in this procrastination phase where I'm like, I still have 2 weeks. I don't want to do this yet. So let me know how you're feeling about the school year. All feelings are valid. So if you're super excited or super stressed, like that's totally okay. But yeah, so anyway, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second so I can kind of see how we're doing. We're already back in school. Oh my goodness, kids come on the 10th. I feel it's way too soon. I agree. I'm curious, if you don't mind sharing, what state are you in? I feel like Georgia, possibly California, and Arizona, those seem to be the first ones that go back every year, because I follow this kindergarten teacher on TikTok, and she's so sweet. I wish, my son's in pre-K. I wish this woman could be my son's teacher because she's amazing. But she's in Georgia, and they were already back. Like the first day of kindergarten was like last week for them. And I'm like, how are you already not only back in school, but with kids already? Like, that's crazy to me. Okay, so you're in Indiana. Oh my goodness. And kids start next Monday. Okay, so maybe it's not just us. Okay, Arizona, some districts started last week. Okay, Justin, are you also from Arkansas? That's so awesome. I know some Arkansas teachers, but it's always nice to meet other teachers from the state as well. We start Thursday in Georgia. Okay. So maybe this one district in Georgia was super early, but I was like, how are you already having your first day? Oh, okay. So you're in Northwest Arkansas. Okay, that's awesome. I'm in Central Arkansas. I feel like I can say it. It's not a big deal. I live in Valonia and I teach in a nearby district. So yeah, very interesting. Now, Justin, you might not have heard of this, but are you by any chance in Ames school? Because if so, we usually have meetings in Little Rock a couple times a year. And if you are in Ames school and you go to that, then I would get to meet you. Not to be like creepy or anything, but that's how I know some Arkansas teachers is we have like, not really conventions, but we have like meetings that we go to. Okay, Ohio goes back on the 23rd. Bay Area, California, we start on the 9th. All right, so it looks like I'm not the only one who's going back pretty soon. Okay, so nervous about preparing for the next group. That's interesting. So, Kelsey, I agree with you. I don't know if anyone else in here has like 10th and 11th graders. I do. And so I love that because I get to start preparing them on some of the skills a little early. The downside is that sometimes when like this year I had a really strong group and next year's group is just so different. So it's not that I'm dreading it. Please don't think that. But it's kind of hard when you have like such different groups and you're like, okay, I got to start over, got to start fresh, that kind of thing. I guess everybody else probably deals with that in some way too. But I like having them 2 years in a row because I feel like at least with like this year when they're juniors, I don't have to go through all that like awkward back to school stuff. Like they already know me. But as 10th graders, sometimes the first 9 weeks, it's like awful. Not awful, but it's like we have to go through so much just like back to basics and then things start like going smoothly. I probably made it sound like it's terrible. It's not. It's just my 10th graders are always in shock when I ask them to write a paragraph. And then by the time they're done with their junior year, they're like willingly writing essays. But the beginning of 10th grade is a little rough. Okay, let's see. How do you plan to start the school year and what are you doing on the first day? I love this question, Christy. So I would be curious what others do on their first day. So go ahead and let me know in the chat. We can talk about some beginning of the year activities as well. And so while people are typing, I'm just going to check the Q&A because I see we have a question there as well. Okay, there's a great question in the Q&A. So let's talk about first day stuff first, and then we'll talk about the question in the Q&A is more about like what are the most important things of the course. And I think that's a really great question as well. So as far as like the first day, I don't do a whole lot of get to know you stuff with my kids that I've already had. I do like to hear about how their summers were, if there's stuff they want to share and stuff. And of course, some of them haven't seen each other. So there's a lot of like nervous energy. So I usually will talk about the course in general with students. I feel like I've toned it down a lot. Like I used to kind of go through my whole syllabus on the first day. I feel like I try to just establish here's what the class is like and how it might be different than previous classes and things like that. And just kind of go through those basic teacher policies and procedures. I know some teachers do some really fun stuff where it's kind of like getting to know the teacher, like about the teacher, kind of one of my coworkers who teaches 9th grade, she does almost like a scavenger hunt thing, or like it's not a scavenger hunt, what would you call it? But like she has different stations and they have to like do little activities to get to know her and the syllabus and all that. It's very cute. It's a little bit too much effort for me if I'm being honest, but I do try to let them know about some of the basics of the class. I also try to address any like concerns that they have, because sometimes they hear stuff from like the previous group and they're like, they might hear, oh, the class is super hard, or, oh, it's super easy. And I kind of want to get ahead of some of those things too. Like, here are my expectations for you. And of course we have to go over like school policies and stuff. So like the first day, not super fun, but then I do try to like get into content somewhat quickly and kind of ease into some of that. Let's see. So we've got Teresa said, I did a lesson with Anthropocene review using hexagonal thinking. Yes, hexagonal thinking is because it's very popular in AP Lit, but I think it could work for AP Lang too. And it starts really good conversations. So in case people aren't familiar with hexagonal thinking, at least my understanding of it is you literally have like hexagons that you can cut out, and kids have to arrange things, whatever's written on the hexagon, based on how it kind of fits. I think it could be used for like line of reasoning. I've seen for literature, I've seen people do it with like theme and characterization and different things, but it can be a very good collaborative activity for sure. So yes, and also some of you might have like summer projects that the kids had to do, either because it was school required or because it was something that you wanted them to do. So sometimes like that check-in for the summer assignment can be helpful. We don't do a summer assignment at our school. They used to, and then they kind of said, hey, like, let's not. So around the time I became the AP Lang teacher, we sort of discontinued the summer assignment. But if you had one, I think that would be appropriate. Some people also do a pretest. I saw a question in the Facebook group a couple days ago about, like, do you give a pretest? And if so, what is it? I personally don't give a pretest because I had them as 10th graders. And also I would worry that the pretest would either give me data that I couldn't use, or it would stress the kids out. Because if I'm worried that if I were to give them an essay too soon or give them multiple choice too soon, I'm worried that it, as much as it could show growth later, I think that's the benefit, is it could be a really good way to diagnose things and show benefits, like show growth later. I would be worried that it would be intimidating early on. And so I do a lot of smaller formative assessments to figure out what skills they do and don't know. I don't do a ton of like pre-testing, if that makes sense. Let's see. So we're having the students paint rocks and share something about themselves. Okay, I like that. So kind of like something creative, and you have a class rock garden. Those kinds of things can be really fun too, because honestly, kids are just getting back into it. So like anything kind of like fun could be really good. Okay, so if you have other ideas, or if you have documents that you want to share, please put them in the chat. I want to answer one of the questions that was in the Q&A, because it says, it's my first year teaching AP Lang, but the person's taught before. What do you think is the most important thing to convey to the students to help them do their best in the course and on the test? So, okay, here's kind of like gut reaction. I think it's helpful for students to recognize that there's more to the course than just the exam. And I say this because as a fellow Arkansas teacher here, in the state of Arkansas, and I know a couple other states do this, our kids get the test paid for, like the Department of Ed pays for it. And there are some pros to that. A lot of my students maybe couldn't afford to pay for the AP test if they had to do it on their own. And it's a way for them to get college credit and things like that. Some students put a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves because of the exam. Other times when the exam is paid for, they're kind of like, yeah, like I might do okay, I might not. So I think one of the things, especially for those that put a lot of weight on, like, I have to make an A in this class, I have to pass the exam or make a qualifying score. I think it's important for students to recognize that there's more value to the class than just the exam. And I say this because inevitably every year I always have a student or two that we kind of know going into it, they're probably not going to make a qualifying score, but the person that they are in May versus the person that they were in August, totally different. So they grow as a writer and a thinker because of this class. And honestly, I've had a few students in the past specifically take the class because they wanted to grow and they wanted to be challenged, but they knew that maybe the exam wasn't going to be their, like they probably weren't going to make a 3 or a 4, but they made a 2 and not a 1. And that was actually a big deal. Like, I have celebrated a couple students making a 2 just as much as I've celebrated some students making a 5, because for the particular individual, a 2 was awesome. So I think it's important for them to realize that in life, they're going to need to be critical thinkers and analytical thinkers, and they're going to need to be able to write well. And so I firmly believe that AP Lang is one of the most helpful classes that students can take in high school. I don't think it's a good fit for everybody, but I do think there's tremendous value in the class versus maybe like some other classes. For instance, like, not knocking AP Lit, but I think students get more out of AP Lang. Unless they want to be an English major, I think AP Lang is probably more impactful for them in the future. So that would be something I would kind of mention. And I think you're going to have to revisit that throughout the year. But there's a lot of valuable skills that they're going to be learning in the class beyond just taking the test. And then I think, okay, best advice as you begin the journey. Since you are a seasoned teacher, you might already know this, but one of the biggest things that I've learned while teaching AP, especially in the beginning of the year, is that shorter writing assignments are often better. When I first started teaching, I thought that if I made the kids write more, that I was somehow a better teacher. Like, and if I graded the essays really quickly, I was somehow better. And I look back and I'm like, what were you thinking? But at the time I was not married and I did not have kids. So I was just super new. And I thought, like, I thought the harder I worked, the better results I would get, I guess is somehow how I thought of it. And the kids did well. But what I realized very quickly is that that was going to lead to burnout. And so instead of having them write whole essays all the time, we would write a paragraph and we'd focus on things at a paragraph level. And I do that even now. Like a lot of the corrections that I need to give them, I can help them fix at the paragraph level. And then once they've mastered that and they go to write an essay, then I have less to correct because we've already addressed it. And then from an AP perspective, one thing that my students frequently tell me is very helpful is that we do a lot of timed things throughout the year, not necessarily always timed essays, but my students also take the ACT. So sometimes we'll have like a multiple choice Monday and I'll time them for a passage. I might give them a little bit more time than what they really would have on the exam and like kind of work backwards. I might time them to write a thesis statement. Hey, you've got 3 to 5 minutes. You got to write something defensible. Sometimes I'll time them to write a paragraph. But the reason why I do this is because it gets them used to being timed. So it takes a little bit of stress off on exam day. I can't totally make it a stress-free day, but the timing helps. And it doesn't always have to be full-blown essays, but getting kids used to being timed is something that my students have said is very helpful. But the shorter writing assignments in the beginning of the year is something that has helped me, especially now in the phase of life where I am. It allows me to give more precise constructive feedback that students actually can use. And I'm able to grade things a lot more quickly. So you might already do that, but that's just a tip as well. Someone said, I second the emphasis on growth. Yes, I just think that's super important because sometimes kids get really wrapped up in the test score. And I don't want to say it's not important because it is. It's just that it sometimes the most amazing transformations that I've seen kids have are not always things that result in a 3, 4, or 5. And some of my top students maybe didn't always get the score that I thought they were going to get, but it doesn't mean that the class was a waste either. So anyway, and it sounds like other people in the chat agree as well. So let me check. There was another question in Q&A that let's see. So I'm trying to figure out how much writing to assign. Okay, good. From assigning just a thesis to a paragraph to a full-blown essay. And with that, how do you grade them and do you grade everything? Okay, that's a great question. That's a really good segue. So let me start with thesis statements. So I assign write a thesis sometimes as bell work. Now, before you do this, you do need to go over what a defensible thesis statement is. I start my year with rhetorical analysis. So I give them like a sentence frame that they can use, and we usually write one together and kind of plug it in. They write their own, but we kind of go over, okay, this is what you need. And I tell my students for rhetorical analysis to be defensible, I want to see the choices, ideally in the verb form. So instead of saying like uses juxtaposition, I want to see like contrast or juxtaposes this and this kind of thing. And we do talk about that. And I also tell them I started calling it MAP last year, message, argument, or purpose, because those are the things that the prompt is going to ask them about. So choices and MAP. As someone who's read rhetorical analysis as an AP reader the past 2 years, they technically just only need the choices and not explicitly message, argument, or purpose in order to be defensible, but it's a stronger thesis when they have both. And so rarely do I deviate from the AP Lang rubric, but that is one deviation that I make. I make it mandatory, if you will, to do both. So those are usually a completion grade in my class. In the beginning of the year, if it's defensible, it's usually 5 points. I grade on total points. So 5 points in my class is a really small grade, whereas like an essay is 100. So just kind of however you do your small grades, that's kind of how I do a thesis statement. As we do a couple of these and we kind of fine tune things, I might say, okay, if it's defensible, technically on the exam defensible, but it's not super strong, it doesn't meet like my extra requirements. Like maybe they have choices but don't have the map, I might say it's like a 3 out of 5. And if they have both, it's a 5 out of 5. It kind of just depends. Like you don't have to do it that way, but there's different ways to do it where it's just a completion grade and those go quickly. You could also have students peer edit if you want to and get feedback. That way they're still getting some constructive criticism. But I don't put a ton of comments on the thesis statements unless there's something glaringly wrong or something like that I think they could do better. But usually I just kind of say like, great job, it's defensible or things like that. So I don't do a ton of comments on thesis statements. The paragraphs, I first ask myself, what is the most important feedback I could give this student? Because some of my students are really strong writers and I'm kind of like, oh, there's not really much I could say, but I have to give them something. And then, a student who is a novice writer or an emerging writer, there might be 20 things I want to tell them. Can't tell them all 20 things. So I ask myself, what is the most important correction I can give them? Usually I focus on content. As much as I might like to look at grammar and things like that, that's really not important for the exam. So we really want to look at content. And usually it boils down to evidence and commentary. I have found that if I just write like questions like, so what or why in the margin, that's not always helpful to my students. So I try to almost like give them sentence starters, or I'll ask a very specific question. Because if I just write why, they don't always know where I'm going with that. But if I ask a more detailed question to get hopefully the commentary that I've wanted, that sometimes helps. So with the body paragraphs, I do tend to grade those a little bit, like there's more to it than just a completion grade in most cases. And then when I get to essays, I use the rubric. And I know there's lots of different ways that people use the rubric. I do grade on all 6 points for AP, but I also give half points. So if I think a student is like, maybe they're not going to earn the sophistication point, but they did really try to do one thing well, and I could kind of see a glimmer of it, I might give them a half point. Or if they wrote like a 1-2-0, but it's almost a 3, I might give them a half point. And I really like the half points for a way to encourage students, because I've noticed that if a student gets like a 1-2-0 and then the next essay a 1-2-0, if they're going to get another 1-2-0, which is kind of a big range, like, there's a lot of ways to earn a 1-2-0. Sometimes if they get like that third 1-2-0, it gets like, it kind of feels like defeated, like, I'm just not good enough or something like that. So I have found that half points do a lot to boost a student's morale, and it rewards them for what they're doing well, even if they're not there yet on the rubric. Because I as much as I like the rubric, like, I'll be honest, I think it's a decent rubric. I think there's a lot of wiggle room in some of these categories, because you could have like a not so great essay get a 1-2-0, and you can have an essay that's almost a 1-3-0 still get a 1-2-0. So the half points have helped be a confidence booster for students as well. So anyway, those are just some thoughts. But if you have other thoughts, like if you have other systems and processes, or processes, however you say it, feel free to put that in the chat as well. But I think anytime you can streamline the grading process, do so. I try to give feedback, like I said, a couple like compliments and a couple like 1 to 2 things that they can improve on. And I try to really make sure that what I'm telling them to improve on is going to be the most impactful. And even if that paragraph is great, I still try to find something. And even if it's great, I still want to point out what they did well, because some of our top performing students also want to know what they did right and what they did well. And sometimes because they're doing so well, sometimes we might not focus on them as much. So, I try to give a couple of comments to each kid. All right, so let me check the chat. Okay, I see some comments about peer editing. Yeah, I build up to peer editing. Part of the reason is at the beginning of the year, I don't feel like they're ready to peer edit because they don't necessarily know my expectations. And also, like, especially at the very beginning of the year, still trying to feel out the group dynamic. So I usually let them partner together, though. We do a lot of like partner and small group. And I like to observe kind of who partners with whom, and like who comes out of their shell in these things, who's no longer friends with somebody, because, sometimes that happens. They won't partner together because something happened. Not that it's my business why they're not friends, but it's interesting to kind of see the group dynamics of partners. But with peer editing, I usually wait until later on in the 9 weeks or the semester to truly let them peer edit. And I always let them peer edit with the person of their choice. And sometimes if there's not a number, we'll do like a group of 3. I don't assign peers, like peer groups for that, because I guess I'm just always worried that I'm going to put the wrong 2 people together and something's going to happen. So I just kind of let them pick. Let's see. So how do you use peer editing with your students? We peer edit some smaller things first. Like, so we will maybe peer edit a thesis statement or something that's kind of safe, if you will, first. They do a lot of partner work anyway that's not peer editing, so that helps build the closeness and the rapport with each other. And then I usually will at least have them peer edit a paragraph probably before I let them peer edit an essay. That sometimes helps as well because they're kind of used to it. But I do want them to see like the type of feedback. Another thing that has helped is I give them, I might give them like a checklist of specific things to look for, because sometimes what happens is they'll just say like, oh, this is great, and they won't really give any feedback, or they maybe do the opposite. They like tear it apart and it really wasn't that terrible. So I try to give like instructions on like, this is what I want you to look for, because some students don't know, especially if they're partnered with a strong writer. They might not know what to look for, because I've seen that kind of happen. Like they're intimidated because they're like, okay, well, this person's a genius. Like, how do I comment on their paper? And I want them to also realize that peer editing isn't always finding stuff wrong. Like, it's okay to point out that they did something well. So I try to give them instructions or a checklist that allow for both of those options. So that way they're complimenting the person and perhaps offering constructive criticism in a polite way. So checklists can be really helpful. And I think I have a couple of those. If anyone needs one, I think I have a rhetorical analysis one that I could look for if people want it. I don't know how helpful it would be, but I have a couple that I've used in the past. Yeah, someone said that they model the workshop process. I think that's really helpful too. Okay, groups of 4. Yeah, so sometimes peer editing doesn't have to be partners. I tend to have smaller classes, so sometimes partners just works better. But if a larger group works for your students, like a group of 4 or maybe like 3, that can help too. That way sometimes that is actually super helpful because they're getting more voices and not just like, so there's less pressure. I guess if you have partners, there's a lot of pressure on like the one person. But if you do a small group, especially for your first time peer editing, I think that could be really helpful, because then it's not so much pressure on like one student. Okay, and then Chris said that they have to verify before giving the sophistication point. I agree. I think sometimes they're either really harsh with it or they're like super generous. And honestly, I think it's confusing sometimes for us as AP Lang teachers too. So the sophistication point is one that it's not that I ignore it, but like, it's not my focus. I pay way more attention to evidence and commentary. Yes. And then also another good point that was brought up in the chat is having them look at the College Board samples. So maybe before they peer edit each other's, give them sample responses, so that way they're comfortable working with the rubric too. I've found that when students are peer editing something that someone in the class did not write, they're able to speak more freely about it. Sometimes they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings or judge somebody, or they're afraid that if they say something that somehow they're going to be judged when it's their turn. So when they know it's a College Board sample, or sometimes I will write a paragraph for them and that they can tear apart. I've done that a few times, especially for my 10th graders. Then they feel like a little bit more relaxed and they can actually like talk about it. So yeah, giving them sample responses that were not written by somebody in the class can be really helpful. Just because like, you don't want anyone to be like embarrassed or feeling like they're judged or something, because writing can be like highly personal. Okay, so lots of great comments in the chat. I see a couple more in the Q&A. So let me see what we got going on. Okay, so how do you structure your class? Do you always do a bell ringer and then jump to a lesson or activity, or do you have certain days that you devote to one thing? Great question. I do not always do a bell ringer. Some days I do. But some days I just really need my classes are 45 minutes. Some days I just really need the whole period to work on whatever we're working on. So I usually use bell ringers for like thesis statement practice maybe, or sometimes that's how I work in our grammar instruction. So I might have them work on No Red Ink. We use the free version of that. We're supposed to, I think, get IXL this year. I saw an email that we are, but I'm not going to believe it till I see it. But I like to do grammar instruction as bell work sometimes. So I'll usually with that choose a topic, like let's say commas and coordinating conjunctions, and like they might have like 3 days or all 5 days, they might do something with that topic grammatically. So it could be no red ink. Sometimes I'll make self-checking resources for them on Google Sheets. So they type in something and it changes green or red if they got it right or wrong, things like that. Sometimes I'll take a practice question, either like a screenshot of one from the SAT or the ACT, or I'll just like rewrite my own, and it's a Google question and they just have to choose A, B, C, D. So those are super quick. So it kind of depends. Some of the bell work I do takes longer, other days it's shorter, but I don't do it every day because some days we just kind of need to jump into things. Or some days I know there's going to be an interruption later, like if we have a planned fire drill or something. So like I might not do bell work that day or something. If you're able to request the premium version of No Red Ink, they have some great stuff. I was wondering about that because I asked, like they called us or something and they asked, to try to like sell it to us. And it was a little bit pricey for what they told us we'd be getting. And I asked them like how closely it aligned with AP Lang, and the person I was talking to couldn't tell me. So I'm really interested to know, for those that have the premium, like what is good about it. Because if it is something worth getting, I would like to pursue that. But because there's a lot of stuff that's like locked. And it seems like all the stuff that's kind of like that higher end kind of writing questions, it seems like those are locked. But I really like it for grammar because there's different ways that you can use it. So I think it's helpful. I like that it generates a lot of questions quickly, because that was one of the things that I was telling my AP coordinator is I can make worksheets for the kids or like make my own stuff. But the problem is that like I can only do so much, and like the No Red Ink kind of takes their answer and kind of customizes it. Like, and it gives them like 10 questions, 20 questions, and it differentiates a little bit better than I could do on my own. So I like that aspect of it. Even though the sentences are a little bit silly, the kids like it. They have step-by-step guided essays using past prompts. Okay, I did not know that. I will look into that then. That's awesome. Okay, how much of your planning is the same from previous years? Great question. And how much do you invent in a new year? And overall, how many total essays do you have the students write a year? Okay, I would love for others to answer this question too. I don't know how many essays I have them write in a whole year because I've never actually counted, but I do know that they write more in the second semester than the first semester. The least, so like they write, I think only 1, maybe 2 in the first 9 weeks. It kind of depends on how things go. In my second 9 weeks, we have an after-school study session, which is required at our school. So they write 1 there. They have to take the semester test, which is another one. It's a synthesis essay. And so we will usually do at least 1 in between those 2 things. So I would say they probably do 4, probably a minimum of 4, a maximum of 6 in the first semester for me. I have no clue how many they do in the spring because it does tend to be a little bit more. So yeah, but I know some people do a whole lot less than I do and they still have very good success. I know that other people do more. I guess I just like to see them write the essays and get the pacing down. But I like to do the essays as sort of like a summative assessment in some sense. And as far as like planning, how different is it? This year I rearranged some of my units. So I used to do satire in the beginning of the year. Satire, to the best of my knowledge, will not be tested on the exam anymore, especially not for rhetorical analysis. So we decided to take that unit and move it down to the end, like spring semester of Honors 10. And that way it freed up a little bit of time for me. And I also took some of the passages that were a little bit easier that I had been doing a little bit later on. I moved those earlier. So things like FDR's Pearl Harbor speech, Bush's 9/11 speech, some of those I moved like more toward the beginning of the year. And I think that will be a good change. It was something that I talked over with a couple of my students and they were like, yeah, those are good ones. Because the way I do my class, and this is just how I do it, I'm not saying everyone should. We start with rhetorical analysis. We do that for at least a marking period. Sometimes it goes a little bit into the next one, depending on how things are. Then my students do synthesis. Their semester test is synthesis. When we come back to school in January, we do kind of like a unit on argument. I like to do synthesis first before argument because my students do better with synthesis. Partially because a lot of them also take APUSH, so they're learning the DBQ process, and so there is some overlap. Also, they like the concreteness of synthesis. They don't have to come up with evidence, they just have to find evidence. The hardest part for my students with argument is coming up with good specific examples, especially under pressure. So we save that for kind of like usually January. And then they kind of do like a little mock exam, and then I go back to rhetorical analysis. And usually when I go back to rhetorical analysis, that's when we start to really talk about some of the deeper stuff, where we might actually start talking about how to make it more sophisticated and things like that. Whereas in the beginning of the year, we're really just kind of delving into like the rhetorical situation and rhetorical choices and what is this and how do we put it together. And then right before the exam, we just kind of do whatever they think their deficits are, kind of like a crash course, if you will. So I do think that each year I kind of reinvent stuff a little bit, but for the most part, I don't make huge changes. I never teach the exact same year twice, if that makes sense. I always change something. And I also try to customize it to the students that I have. Like this group that I've got coming up is going to need a lot more help with argument and probably a lot more help with rhetorical analysis compared to last year. And I say this because as 10th graders, when they were preparing for their state test, and I asked them, it's kind of like an argument essay, and I asked them to come up with evidence. Their evidence for everything was either Mean Girls or some other TV show. 13 Reasons Why something. We had a whole lot of TV references. Now, that's not bad, but it lacked academic depth. So I know that this year we're going to really have to talk about like what we should write about with our evidence. There were a few where I was like, we're gonna have to talk about this before you take the AP Lang test, because their evidence was just not super strong. Okay, so no writing, not sure if it's worth the price, but we've adapted it. I would really be curious to see what it's like. Yeah, definitely reach out and we can chat about it for sure. Because we're always looking, I'm sure everybody has this, but we're always looking to raise test scores. And I feel like the English grammar scores are a little easier to raise than the reading, but our focus for the past like 3-4 years has been the reading scores. So if anyone has any brilliant ideas about how to raise reading scores, let me know. Because we always talk about that. Do you do any work with current events? Yes and no. I try to sometimes do that. So I will sometimes have them, I guess it really depends on what we're studying, but I'll try to bring in like maybe an article or a podcast that they can listen to. Sometimes I'll just have them kind of do an outside of class assignment on current events. I know some teachers use the donut, or I think the other one's called like All Sides. I think the donut might be a little bit more, not advanced, but I think like the more people use the donut from what I've gathered with that kind of thing. Because I have noticed that is a bit of a deficit of some of my students is like the current events thing. So I do try to bring in outside stuff every once in a while. It really depends on what it is. But speaking of, I'll put a link to it. Some of you, I posted this in the in one of the groups, so you might have already seen it, but I can let me pull it up and I'll screen share and I can show you how I'm kind of tackling some of this year. I just need to remember what I called it. Does anyone else have that happen where you have so many things in your Google Drive that you need to remember what you called it so then you can actually search for it? Because that's where I'm at. Let's see. But basically what I did is I had students last year do like this ongoing assignment where they would respond to different prompts, and they did it in like a Google Doc. And they said that it was helpful because before the exam, I had them kind of take all of that and like synthesize it, I guess, or like narrow it down into kind of like the things that they were sort of experts on. So we can never really predict the the question 3 prompt. But I did want them to kind of know going into it, like, hey, these are the things that I could talk about well. And so my students said that was helpful, kind of like throughout the year discussing things, and then before the exam really kind of narrowing it down to what they could talk about. But they said that doing it on a Google Doc was not the most helpful way. They suggested Google Slides. So let me show you. Oh, Flip Slide is good too. Let me show you what I like created. And I did not do the graphics on this. I had someone else help me with it because I am not good at graphic design. I can share the link to this if people want it. But these are kind of like all the slides to choose from. This is not the order that I intend to do it per se. And these slides that have like the title, current events and stuff, I think those are kind of obsolete. They look cute, but you don't really need them. So let's say I wanted students to do a current event. I might assign this in Google Classroom because that's what we use. So read an article that was published in the past 2 weeks, write a summary of the article and a reflection or reaction to the article's content. So I might assign this on like a Monday and maybe have it due on a Friday. So this box right here is where they would do their reaction, and it should have been down here. As we're watching this, I will do that. But this is where like I would want them to put like the link to the article. So I would maybe have them do something like this, where they're just responding kind of briefly on a Google slide. And of course they can change the font size and stuff. So that would be like one option. You could assign a specific article to them too. And so I have some of these here. This one's more open-ended. They just write something. And then a lot of the prompts deal with education. I have a whole unit that we do, a sort of a thematic unit, I guess you could say, on education. So I might have them do like a brainstorming and a thesis one for this. I don't know. I left it kind of open. But anyway, these are just slides like that I had. So, sometimes I might have them look at a specific historical figure. Sometimes I'll let them choose because I think student choice can be really fun. Or like if we're reading something, like let's say we're reading a speech by FDR, especially if they haven't covered him in history class yet, like maybe I have them research the speaker of what we're doing. So anyway, these are just like, a lot of them are very similar. They're just templates that you can kind of see. A historical event could also be important because, I feel like students kind of have general knowledge about a lot of basic events, but maybe not specific knowledge. So anyway, these are some personal experience. I think it's good for students to have practice writing about personal experience, because I've noticed that a lot of the prompts recently lend themselves to personal experience. So this year it was about timely decisions. Last year was about perfectionism. And so I think there's a way where students can write about themselves and their experiences effectively. So this could be one where I might just assign this as like an out of class assignment for the week, write about a meaningful moment in your life. And this could be good at the beginning of the year too, because you could get to know your students. So something like that. So there's a few. Your greatest challenge. This one's actually pretty good if they're I know a lot of us teach juniors, but a lot of the prompts that my students have to write for college application essays ask about either their greatest accomplishment or their greatest challenge. And students are really stumped by that sometimes. So anyway, these greatest accomplishment, these are just some others that you could use. Social media. I really like having them listen to podcasts every once in a while. I think it can be kind of fun. This one was interesting last year. I had them find a heartwarming story on social media because they're on TikTok and stuff all the time anyway. So yeah, you could use these if you want to, TED Talks, things like that. But it's really short and simple. So anyway, I will stop sharing. And if people want the link, I'm happy to put it in the chat. But I just kind of choose which slides I want. And then I make like a separate one to assign to students. But that was just kind of like all of them put together. All right, yeah, let me get that link for everybody. I'll make like a copy link so that way you can have access to it. And you can use it however you see fit in your classroom. That's just how I am probably going to use it this year, is just kind of like an outside of class thing. Because I don't think it would be too burdensome or time consuming for them to do. Just my opinion, but I think it would be okay. All right, let me make sure it's the right one. It is. So yeah, I will put that link in the chat. But if you have like a different way to use it that works really well for your students, feel free to let me know that as well. I just thought like that it was pretty versatile. So that link that I just put in the chat should be to all the slides. So you're welcome to just kind of use what you want and how you want to use it. And it should make you your own copy. So that way you can edit things. So the background of the slides really can't be edited. I think that's kind of stuck on there. But I think I had it, yes, so that the directions can be changed. So if there is a typo or if there is like something that you would not say it that way and you're like, no, we would say this, then obviously go ahead and change it as well, however you need to. All right, you are so welcome. All right, so let me just double check the chat and see if, or the chat and the Q&A. Okay, I guess I can delete them once I've answered them. Maybe that would help. Because it doesn't seem like it's putting these in order. Let's see. So we talked about how I structure the class, sort of. Just to go back to the structure, I feel like this is just teaching 101. So I apologize if it's super obvious, but I like to also do a lot of like, let's say like whole class and then partners and then individual assignments kind of thing, especially when we're introducing things. Like I like to have a discussion, but I also like to have partner or small group work and then ultimately build to independent stuff. So that's kind of like what you might see on a daily basis is that kind of a structure, depending on what we're covering. In addition to bell work, I don't really do exit tickets because honestly, I feel like kids are always rushing to, like at the end of class, like, oh, it used to bug me as a novice teacher because I was always told like, you don't pack up, like, like the bell doesn't dismiss you, I dismiss you kind of thing. That's how my teachers were in high school. So I like first year teacher, I was like, you should not be packing up 3 minutes before the bell. And then I realized like, they're not doing it to be disrespectful in most cases, but sometimes they have a class that's like clear across campus and they also need to, stop and use the restroom or something. So like they need to get out quickly. But that drove me nuts the first like month of teaching. And then I had to lighten up a little bit. But I don't do exit tickets for that reason, because usually a kid might want to stay after class and ask a question, or if they don't finish the exit ticket, then I just don't do a lot of exit tickets. Let's see. Do you have a certain format of assignments, activities that you frequently use? Yes, sort of. I'm trying to think if I have any like templates or anything that I could share. So I mentioned that I do the thesis statements and like the paragraphs. Those are kind of things that they don't do it for everything that we read, but we do them somewhat frequently. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we do. Each year I usually have the students at some point do an outline. Sometimes we do an outline before and they'll write the essay. That usually helps. Sometimes I will assign an outline in place of an essay. So if I need to know that they understand something and they can create a good line of reasoning, but I don't really want to grade a ton of essays at that point for whatever the reason is, I'll do outlines. I wish I had a picture of it to show, but last year I had them do it in different ways. Like one year I had them use Post-it notes and they like kind of did their own outline. That was fun for them. It took way longer than I thought, and the Post-it notes lost their stickiness, so that made it kind of annoying. So last year, instead of Post-it notes, they kind of did like a mind map. Like I gave them a couple different format options, but for the synthesis that we were doing, they had to collaborate to figure out what's your thesis, what are your main points, which sources are you going to bring in? And I had them like try to, at one point they had to indicate how they were situating it in a broader context. So we talked about how it was the library prompt. So we talked about how they could bring up how libraries during COVID, we talked about how they could bring up personal experience with libraries, like that kind of thing. So they had to kind of work together and make like a mind map or outline and like decorate it. And so they were really nice. And I did this right before parent teacher conferences so that I had something to hang up so that parents could see, because I don't know, I don't do a lot of decoration or anything, but like inevitably before parent teacher conference every year, I try to do something either like something like that or like one pagers. One pagers can be a good one too. I don't do those very frequently, but those can be helpful and like a way for kids to demonstrate their learning in a creative way. So I don't know, but if anyone else has any assignments that they use frequently, or even if it's not like frequently throughout the year, but you're like, I do this every year and my kids love it. We have a couple of new AP Lang teachers in here, so feel free to put those assignments in the chat as well. I know some of the ones that are kind of popular are like the high school drama synthesis from Tim Pretest and Katie Storms. Is it Alan Ripley? There's one assignment that I see a lot of people do that they get really creative with. But there's a few others. So if there's something that you're like, hey, if you're a new AP Lang teacher, you should know about this, feel free to put it in the chat because I know there are Facebook groups and stuff, but sometimes those are a little tricky to navigate. At least for me, there's like a lot of posts and stuff. Can you share, or can one pagers work for the rhetorical situation? Yes, I think they could. So one pagers, I feel like you could adapt it to whatever you want to do. So like last year, I think it was with my sophomores, I had them do like, kind of like focusing on rhetorical choices as part of their one pager, but you could do the rhetorical situation too. And they like kids can be really creative. Yes, the outline activity, I will show that at some point. I have pictures of it from last year. And I think we're going to do it during the library synthesis again this year, just because I felt like it fit well. So I will definitely mention that at future ones for sure. I don't know if I have the pictures of it right away though. But yeah, I think you can make one pagers adapt to like virtually anything. Which can be really good. For a line of reasoning, I have students write out the thesis, evidence, and sentences that tie back to the thesis. Good. Onto links. And then, is it kind of, okay, the fact that I still have this is kind of funny. So I did a like online training, like on YouTube a while ago, a couple weeks ago. And I like shared like something like this. Okay, this is like a terrible example, but each colored paper represented a different part. So they had like their thesis and evidence and commentary. So I don't know if anyone else does something like this, but one teacher sent me a picture that she does where she doesn't do as many colors. And I actually really like her way too, but she has like them highlight like the linking language, which is really helpful because I feel like with line of reasoning, students understand the concept of transitions, but they don't always understand how all these parts work together. So but I would be really curious, but like the paper chains, like the physical representation of line of reasoning, I agree with you. And I think there's so many different ways to do it. But I did something like that with like different colored paper. But the person, I can't remember her name. I think it was Megan, but I could be totally wrong. So apologies if it was you who sent me the picture, but I have it. And it was really cool how like they would highlight. So like if the thesis was blue, anything that linked back to the thesis, they would highlight it in blue, and it worked really well. But yeah, line of reasoning can be really tricky. I've also done stuff where we've cut up the passage before. You have to choose like certain passages for that. Like it sort of has to have an obvious line of reasoning. But I've done a couple videos on this before where they have to unscramble the passage, and that can be really fun because it's a group activity. And I usually hear some really good conversation with that because they'll say something like, okay, clearly this is the beginning because he's greeting everybody, or this is the call to action, so it must go at the end. So there's different ways to do line of reasoning too. And I think anytime we can make stuff like tangible, it kind of breaks up I don't want to say that our classes are monotonous, but my kids love it when we do like the occasional one pager or the occasional like paper chain or something, because it's just something different. Demonstrating an understanding of the choices the writer makes because of the rhetorical situation on a one pager. Yes, absolutely. Because that's the thing that I think students miss. Just from having read a lot of rhetorical analysis essays, I feel like the connection that they miss is like they understand what their rhetorical situation is. They understand what rhetorical choices are, but they miss the connection of the fact that the speaker, is making these rhetorical choices because of the rhetorical situation. And that's, I think, to me, that's usually the difference between a score of a 120 and a 130 or higher, because they're missing that connection there, like the true why did they do this. So yeah, I absolutely think you could do a one pager. Yeah, Dottie said just like that. Okay, so I'm glad to know that somebody else does paper chains as well. Let's see. How do you introduce rhetorical choices? That's a great question. I like to do I have students analyze a commercial toward the beginning of the year. And I feel like you can use commercials for the rhetorical situation and rhetorical choices, whether you want to do one or the other or both. I don't give students a big long list of choices to memorize, but I do have a couple like poster looking things that I made for my classroom. I'm in the process of trying to redo them, but I'm kind of limited in the access to paper that I have and stuff. So anyway, point is I do have like a little word wall that the students sometimes refer to, but word walls sometimes work, sometimes don't. But anyway, I feel like the best way to get them to understand the concept of rhetorical choices is for them to see it in action. The other thing that I think is very important as far as rhetorical choices is verbs. So a lot of times they'll know nouns, which are devices. And so a lot of the time, I think we could take the noun and turn it into a verb. So for instance, if we saw, let's say, juxtaposition, right? So a contrast, they could say juxtaposes or contrasts. If there's a metaphor, we can say compares instead of like uses a metaphor. So I have found that it really starts to sink in once students see it in action. And I kind of have like a list of maybe like 10 to 12 that I tend to point out the most. So comparison, contrast, examples, details, those are things that students kind of can readily talk about at the beginning of the year. But I think, oh, bye, Tara. I think the best thing is getting them to use what we call rhetorically accurate verbs as soon as possible. Because it makes the writing more precise. There are lists of rhetorically accurate verbs out there. I don't print those for students because sometimes I think students, like there's so many of them and they just choose a word from the page. They're not really thinking about what word it is. But what I will do is sometimes do like, I might, as we're talking about it in class, I might give them certain words to include in their writing. Or I might do like a mini word wall or something if I think that'll help. But the verbs is I think really important. If I'm afraid that if I post a word wall of choices, then they will use that vocab in the essay and not verbs to explain it. Yes, that makes sense. I have like a verb wall, I guess. It is not fancy. I literally took index cards and stuck them up on my cabinets, but I have I have some verbs that I like them to use, like emphasizes, illustrates, highlights, more for commentary, not the rhetorical choices, but I have those on like the cabinets in my classroom. And then I have some like mini posters with like the choices on there. Those are the ones that I'm in the process of trying to redo. But yes, so I think choose what works best for your students. But I think like a word wall or a handout could be really helpful. But I think less is more with this because anytime they get a huge list, it might intimidate them. They might use words wrong. And also I've found like I keep it to like 10 to 12 because otherwise the word wall could become a crutch. So like I don't want them like scanning the word wall every time they write something either. Like I want it to be there if they need it, but not as like an automatic resource, if that makes sense. But yeah, commercials is a really good idea. I have, if I can find it quickly, I'll put it in the chat. I recently made a 9-week unit for rhetorical analysis. And within the first week, there's a commercial assignment in that unit. And I think I have, if I can find it, I think I made a slideshow specifically of the commercials. And if so, I'd be happy to share that part. I can't share the link to the whole the whole 9-week unit, or at least I can't put the whole 9-week unit in the chat, but I can at least share the commercials. It does say week 1 on it. So and I don't think that part can be taken off. Unfortunately, I think that's like embedded in it. But if you like this, you're welcome to use these commercials. Just please vet them before you show them to your class because each school has different standards. My school tends to be on the more conservative side for things. And these have all been approved for like my school, but I don't want to assume that they're okay for everybody's school. But anyway, let me get everybody that link in case it is helpful. In case you're like, you want to incorporate commercials. but don't know where to start, here are some recommendations. So let me put that in the chat. Oh, yes. Thank you, Judy. So that's just a very tiny, tiny portion of the 9-week unit that I'm happy to freely share. And if you would like more info on the 9-week unit, I'd be happy to like answer questions about that later if I need to. Let's see. Do you focus specifically on tone, diction, or syntax? I rarely do syntax because I feel like kids don't know how to write about syntax. And so I always find it funny when I read essays where it's like the writer uses syntax. I think there's a time and a place to talk about it. And I like to sometimes point out model sentences. So like if in class for our grammar, we're talking about like colons or dashes, I might like point it out when writers use it effectively, but I don't really encourage them to write about it just because I think it's really hard. And I think there's usually something else to write about instead. I do talk about diction and tone. And the reason why is because diction and tone are like, they're in everything, I guess you can say. And so like I tell my students sometimes like they're worried that like they're just not going to recognize a rhetorical choice and they're not going to know what to write about. So I tell them like at the very least, you always have diction and tone to write about. With diction, I feel like there's a way they should write about it. So we don't want to say the writer uses diction, but we could put an adjective in front of it. That's, I think, the first step is like, is it patriotic diction? Is it, I don't know, somber diction? Like we want to kind of at least qualify it a little bit. I do have a video about writing about diction. And I think in the description of the video, there's a handout. If it's not in the description of the video, if you reach out to me, I'd be happy to send it to you because I don't think I have it in my Google Drive, but I do have a handout about writing about diction. Yes, let me post a link to this video. It's from last year, and it's really short. Apparently it's like 4 minutes, but I think it could be helpful because I noticed that a lot of students want to write about diction. So here's the video link. And so I think there's a way that they can. I think there's a way to get students to do so effectively. Same with appeals. I'm not a huge fan of like a whole paragraph about logos, ethos, pathos, especially like all three in an essay. But I do think that students can, if they understand that choices create appeals, it makes for a more meaningful essay. So I tell my students, like, if you notice, let's say pathos. First of all, we don't call it pathos in our essay. We say an emotional appeal or the actual emotion. But we want to figure out what is the writer doing to make that appeal. So if you notice that they're appealing to like sympathy, what did they do to create that appeal? Is it the detail, the imagery, the word choice, that kind of thing? If they notice an appeal to logic, what is it that they did that was logical? Is it facts, statistics, examples, conditional sentences? So that's something, and I have a video about writing about appeals too, but I think that's helpful because so many times I see students write a whole paragraph about logos or ethos or pathos or all three, and those essays just rarely ever make it past the 120 mark. I'm not saying they can't. I'm sure they could, but they are kind of limiting themselves from the start, in my opinion. So definitely, I think kids could write about those things. I just think we need to reinforce like a little bit of how to. But especially for emerging writers, sometimes diction and tone are an easy place to start because they're sort of always there. Let's see. All right, I'm going to check the Q&A really quickly. Just make sure I answered everybody's. I think I did. All right, and I did share the slides. Good. And I think I answered all of them. Okay. All right. So in that case, I think we have covered a whole lot. Now, next month, like I said, I think Tim is going to be joining us. I'm kind of volunteering him, but the last time we talked, he said he would be here. So unless something comes up, you can expect to see both of us. And also, if you need anything, like if there's something that you want clarification on, or if you need help with something, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me, coachhallwrites@gmail.com. I do have a teacher email list. I'll put the link to that in the chat in case people want it. When you sign up for it, you get a series of emails about teaching rhetorical analysis. So I'll put that link in the chat, but I try really hard to respond to people's emails and questions. Thank you, Audrey and Amy and Chris. So like people have sent me DMs on like Facebook, Instagram. So whatever works for you. And I try to follow up. If I don't, like, please don't be offended. Feel free to reach out again. Sometimes like I don't know, like you like I reply in my head or something. I don't know. So just let me know how I could be of assistance, because if I have something to share, I will absolutely share it. And if I don't have something to share, but I can make something to share, I will. All right, awesome. So yes, please reach out. And also our next meeting is, let's see, it's the very last Sunday of August. I wrote it down and now I forgot. Okay, I think it's August 28th. It's the last Sunday. I will send out reminders on social media and stuff, and it'll be a little bit more structured next time because most of us will be back to school. Today, I wanted to kind of do like an open Q&A, but I will be doing more of like a little bit of a workshop style in the future, just FYI. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great school year, because I know we're starting soon. And like I said, please reach out if you need any assistance. But thank you for coming, and I will see you next time.